A founder I know started his business at 45 and everyone told him the same thing. You're too late, too old, that the market was too saturated, that the perfect economic window to start a business had already closed years ago. They were completely wrong. He did not build a billion-dollar tech unicorn. He did not need to. Today, he runs a lean, highly profitable operation that gives him enough cash flow to stop working whenever he wants, and enough financial security to finally sleep without panicking at 3 a.m. The biggest lie in the entrepreneurial world is that there is a deadline, that if you did not launch the perfect startup in your 20s, you are already finished. I watched this belief operate inside corporate for years. Brilliant, capable people who had spent decades building real skills, real networks, real insight paralyzed, convinced that because they could not have a perfect launch, they might as well have nothing. That is not caution, that is a trap. And today we are going to dismantle it. When you wait for the perfect moment, you are falling into one of the most well-documented psychological traps in behavioral economics. The voice that tells you it is too late or the economy is too unstable right now is not rational thinking. It is your brain manufacturing a socially acceptable reason to stay comfortable. You tell yourself, if I cannot build something massive anyway, why deprive myself of comfort today? It feels like logic. It is not. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy wearing a suit. Then comes what I call the shame math. You start calculating where you would be if you had just started 5 years ago, the compounded revenue, the client base you would have built. And that calculation feels devastating, so devastating that it becomes another reason not to start now. But here is what the hustle culture crowd conveniently leaves out of the conversation. Starting early is not the only variable that determines success. In corporate, we evaluated business risk across multiple dimensions. Market timing was one factor, but founder readiness, network depth, and financial stability were weighted just as heavily. When you start later, you bring advantages to the table that a 24-year-old founder simply does not have. A stabilized lifestyle, clarity about what you actually want to build, and professional networks that took decades to form. Networks that can become your first clients, your first referrals, your first strategic partners. Here's something that almost never gets discussed in the entrepreneurial space. And I say almost never because inside corporate boardrooms, it gets discussed constantly when evaluating leadership. Experienced founders have hidden advantages that younger founders simply do not possess. Experience teaches patience. If you have worked inside a company for a decade or two, you have lived through market crashes, recessions, restructures, and genuinely terrible management decisions. You have watched the professional world not end multiple times. That lived experience does something critical for your business. When a client fires you, or a campaign flops, or a quarter comes in 40% below target, you do not panic and shut everything down. And that matters more than most people realize. The number one destroyer of a new business is not a bad product. It is founder panic. It is the emotional decision made at 2 a.m. after a bad month that unravels everything that was working. I watched it happen inside corporate to entire divisions, a bad quarter triggering decisions that caused far more damage than the original problem ever would have. Because you have weathered professional storms before, you are significantly less likely to make those emotional, fatal mistakes. You also know yourself better. You know exactly how much risk you can absorb, which means you can calibrate your business decisions with precision instead of guesswork. But I need to warn you about a trap that catches late starters more than anyone else. And I have watched it play out in real businesses, people who finally decided to move and then immediately made it worse. When founders start after years of waiting, a dangerous temptation kicks in, the urge to catch up fast, to compress 10 years of growth into 18 months. So they swing big, they sign an expensive office lease before they have a single client, they wire their savings to a trendy agency, they take on loans to fund a rebrand nobody asked for. The logic feels sound. If you need to grow faster, you take bigger swings. But this is exactly backwards from how corporate finance evaluates business risk at the early stage. Business moves that can double your revenue can also take your cash flow to zero with equal speed. When you are starting later in life, a catastrophic financial loss is not just a setback you can recover from in 2 years. It can be genuinely life-altering. What you need is reliable, lean growth, proof of concept before investment, revenue before overhead. The gap between aggressive growth and reckless spending is exactly where small businesses go to die, and it is a gap I want this channel to help you navigate. Now, let us talk about the emotional weight of this, because the business strategy only works if you actually deal with what is sitting underneath it. The feeling of having waited too long is almost always wrapped in shame. You spent years building someone else's company, executing someone else's vision, growing someone else's asset, and now you are looking at the gap between where you are and where you thought you would be, and it feels like a verdict on your choices. It is not. That shame is what economists call a sunk cost. It cannot be recovered through continued punishment. Carrying it into your business decisions does not make up for lost time. It just sabotages the time you still have. Psychologists have documented something called the fresh start effect, the way people use arbitrary markers like a new year, a new decade, or a birthday to finally pursue a goal they have been deferring. The interesting thing about this effect is that the marker itself is completely arbitrary. It only works because the person decides it works. You do not need the calendar to give you permission. You can decide right now that today is the marker, because the alternative, waiting another 5 years until it feels even more hopeless, is not a strategy. It is just more of the same. Every year you wait makes this harder, not because the market closes, but because the story you tell yourself about why you cannot start gets more elaborate and more convincing. The version of you that started perfectly 10 years ago is fictional. That person does not exist and never did. The only real version of you is the one here right now, deciding what to do next. Here is the truth that nobody in the hustle culture space wants to say out loud, because it does not sell courses. You are going to be 5 years older eventually, no matter what. The years are going to pass whether you build this business or not. The only question is whether the future version of you has a profitable asset, or whether they are still sitting with the same plan they had today. The best time to start was 10 years ago. The second best time is today. Stop waiting for the window to be perfect. The window is open right now, and the next video is going to show you exactly where your business setup is silently bleeding money before you have even found your first client. Subscribe so you do not miss it.